Choices are important to video games. While video games are technically full of choices in the strategic sense, where to go and what to do, there are also those in a storytelling sense. Deny or approve, rescue or harvest, fight or spare, and so on. This probably sounds obvious, but these choices are what allow players to express themselves as well as interact with the world and its characters. It can bring in a level of immersion by placing you in the character's shoes and asking you to make a choice for them. What do you think is the right decision, or just what would you do if it was up to you? Because now, it is. While most games have choices alongside the gameplay, there's a whole genre of games with decision-making designed at their center. Choose your own adventure games. But these tend to have a problem, and that's in making choices matter. No matter what you pick, your decisions can have no consequences. These essentially trick the player into thinking they have more impact on the world and its story than they really do. Don't get me wrong, these are usually placed with good intentions, but the budget, strict deadlines, and hardware limitations can limit how much influence you've really had in a choose-your-own-adventure game. Insert the Henry Stickmin Collection, a choose-your-own-adventure game that is only the second release from the publisher's Inner Sloth, the other being Among Us, which has received even higher critical acclaim. How much higher? Well, as of writing this, the Henry Stickmin Collection is rated overwhelmingly positive on Steam and is the third most positively rated game on the platform. This game is more positively rated than games including Telltale's Batman, Firewatch, Minecraft Story Mode, Doki Doki Literature Club, and Fallout 4. So then, is this game the innovative masterpiece that transcends gaming itself? Well, no. Though it's still an excellent game nonetheless, and one that has something at its core that I believe has helped it earn that ranking, by doing something that the other games I mentioned didn't. Making choices matter. So instead of this just being a review, spoilers, I like the game, instead I want to look at how a comedic, point-and-click game featuring stick figures and made mostly by one person manages to achieve a surprising level of player agency and how that blends into the game's humor. This is the Henry Stickmin Collection. For those who don't know, or haven't thought about Henry Stickmin in the last decade, that might not even be a joke for you, this franchise started 12 years ago. In the Henry Stickmin Collection, you play as Henry Stickmin, a thief, prisoner, and a few other things. The first Henry Stickmin game debuted in 2008 with Breaking the Bank, and has continued to get installments every few years until the release of Completing the Mission, which is currently the final installment in the Henry Stickmin series. I'll also come clean and say that I found out about the games through what I didn't realize was a pirated iPad version of Stealing the Diamond back in middle school, and I didn't play the games properly through Newgrounds until a few months ago. I'm glad to have actually paid for the games at full price now. Speaking of, while all the previous chapters were free to play on Newgrounds, Completing the Mission is only available through the Henry Stickmin Collection, which is for sale on Steam for $15. The collection also has updated versions of each previous game, now labeled as episodes, but sadly a few objects and sounds have been removed, presumably for copyright reasons. Mostly because I'd imagine selling a game that has a portal gun, head crab, and sniper all in the same episode on a platform owned by the people who made those games wouldn't have looked good. I also want to say that this isn't a very conventional game, even compared to the games that I mentioned, or within its own genre. This game is about making choices in a few QuickTime events, rather than a constant gameplay loop or additional mechanic like exploring, talking, crafting, shooting, puzzle solving. You get the idea. So, technically speaking, choosing is the core mechanic. That's a brief rundown on the Henry Stickmin games, and going forward, I recommend that you buy the game and play it straight through at least once. This game is pretty funny, and being someone who's about to break down the gameplay and writing of a comedy stick figure game, I'd rather not spoil a game that thrives on being unpredictable. I'm also technically going to be spoiling some details from those other games I mentioned, but you can already imagine why, and it's not me directly laying out plot points. I also want to say that I quite enjoyed most of the games I mentioned, despite this video criticizing them quite a bit. So, with that out of the way, I want to start by saying that there are very few spoilers in regards to the endings because the episodes themselves are named quite literally. Breaking the Bank is about breaking into a bank. Spoilers, you break into the bank. Escaping the prison is about escaping the prison. Spoilers, you escape the prison. However, in completing the mission, the titular mission will be different depending on how you go about and what you do when infiltrating the airship and how you flee the complex. If you play straight through each episode, you'll only have one combination of endings to choose from. So the real spoilers come in how you do something rather than what you're doing. At some points, there's only one right answer, while at others, every choice leads down its own path. So it becomes not only a matter of what choice looks cool or seems correct, but which way you as a player would like to go. Between every episode, there are 32 endings, with completing the mission bolstering that grand total with 16. To say that your choices matter would certainly be accurate, especially when most of these choices lead down very different paths. Compare the 16 distinct overall endings to any Telltale game, where your choices are practically inconsequential. In Minecraft Story Mode, telling someone you're not their friend still leads them to befriending you, and no matter what, the only thing that truly changes the ending to Telltale's Batman is a simple 2-option prompt at the very end that looks and achieves the same thing regardless of your actions prior. Why have choices when they don't matter? Well, that can be for a number of reasons. As I said before, those choices can begin with the intentions of having more impact, but then there are issues that develop over time. The budget and deadlines being huge influences, since, as you can imagine, it would take a lot of time and effort into crafting special-made endings that reflect even just a few of the player's choices. So it's easier to have small or inconsequential choices to keep the player engaged, and then display their stats at the end with just a handful of elements that show the player's impact throughout their playthrough. A different visual here, a different line of dialogue there, that kind of thing. However, the result is still a game that gives you choices, and hints at those choices being impactful, only for the story to end the same regardless, making those choices fairly meaningless. The point is, I'm shocked that Telltale games are the most popular and commonly known titles in the choose-your-own-adventure genre, considering how little justice they seem to do in order to qualify for it. Meanwhile, Henry Stickmin contains 16 final endings that are influenced by the choices you make in the previous 2 episodes, each with wildly different results. The choices you make matter, at least to a more significant extent, so there's no questioning whether or not the decisions the game has you make at any point could influence the end result. They may not all decide your ending, but you know at least some of them will, and that those choices aren't just button prompts to make you feel a sense of agency in an otherwise scripted game. So now let's have a look at those choices. They're pretty basic. They're not very descriptive, and therefore the player really doesn't know what to expect from each one. However, this isn't the only game to have this problem. If you're familiar with Fallout 4, you'll know the game's choices can be incredibly vague with its dialogue options. Not only that, but some choices have no impact, in either short-term and long-term, so not only do you not know for sure what each choice truly means, but you don't even know if the choice will mean anything. The difference between Fallout 4 and the Henry Stickmin collection is that Henry Stickmin is a comedy game at its core, and so the lack of context helps strengthen the punchline. Snap Neck doesn't exactly mean the guards, and Charles, well, it doesn't exactly explain what Charles is going to do. By being a comedy game, it's able to use a common problem in other choose-your-own-adventure games and uses it to its advantage for comedic effect. And with that, I finally get to mention the main hook of this game. Failures. Almost every single failure is a joke. In some way, every wrong choice you make backfires in a comedic fashion, some funnier than others, but they all at least got a smirk out of me. And if they don't, then you at least don't lose any progress. You just retry and keep going. When you make the right choice, you get to progress, and when you fail, you're at least guaranteed a joke in the process, and you don't lose any progress. Sometimes the most hilarious answer is also the right one, in which case, it's a win-win. Very few games have found a way to make failure part of the entertainment. Usually it's without much fanfare and comes with its own frustrations. A lack of progress, an additional challenge to overcome, and maybe even the enemy taunting you. Of course, that's usually by design. After all, some games need stakes. But at times in the Henry Stickmin collection, it's more fun to fail than it is to succeed. Also, references. Lots of references. So it's a point-and-click, pick-your-path comedy game that, like most jokes, relies on being unexpected. It's easy to see how a YouTube video could provide the same experience, and would only cost viewing an ad or two, much less than the $15 price tag. Odds are good that you've done this with a game before. I certainly know I have. But I want to talk about what kind of games typically lie victim to this, and how I think Henry Stickmin at least attempts to differentiate itself from other games in this category. What category is that? Well, it's one I like to call experience games. So, what is an experience game? Essentially, it's a game where the game factor takes a back seat, but is still a game nonetheless. the main hook of the game tends to rely on the narrative or shock value. Hence, an experience game. Most choose-your-own-adventure games would probably qualify for this category, as well as most dating sims and walking simulators. With an emphasis on the story, the gameplay is often restricted to only a handful of inputs from the player, such as choices of varying impact and some QuickTime events. Experience games are less about being a game and more so about being an experience, which on its own doesn't sound like a bad thing, and it isn't. However, the problem lies in an experience game losing its edge after the initial playthrough, just because you know what's coming. This can happen for a number of reasons. A few examples would be a lack of player agency in the narrative, and therefore a lack of new content on an additional playthrough, or the game relying on the story too much and not caring about interesting and varying gameplay. You'll occasionally hear developers complain about Let's Players ruining the chance of potential customers, because their video delivers the same experience for far cheaper a price. Recently, a creative director at Google Stadia proposed that all Let's Players and streamers should pay a licensing fee like with music. I understand where they're coming from, but to me, if you get the same experience from seeing someone else play a game, or even a better one because the game is too shallow in terms of story or gameplay to be worth a purchase, then the Let's Player isn't at fault for the game's primary selling point relying heavily on, say, shock value. Now, I'm not saying that every experience game is made to be some shallow story priced higher by being a game. Not every developer can or wants to make something with the same replayability as The Witcher, Breath of the Wild, or Firewatch, but there are plenty of games that simply don't hold up when replaying them, and that's because the developer envisioned a specific experience in the form of a game. If the player had the agency to finish the game without experiencing it in the way the developer intended, then that vision would be lost. Doki Doki Literature Club has themes specifically regarding choice, so while the choices may lack influence, it at least has a reason tied to the plot behind it. No game is infinitely replayable either. Superhot, Firewatch, and Minecraft all had content beyond their main campaign I found to be worth continuing playing or replaying for, but even that has its limits. In case I haven't made it clear already, I don't think any less of experience games. Stories Untold is one of my favorite horror games, but the story relies on building up its mystery element, and the puzzles themselves aren't engaging enough on their own to warrant a second playthrough, so it clearly qualifies as an experience game. It's still an amazing game, and I highly recommend it, but if you watch a Let's Play instead, I don't blame you. The Henry Stickmin collection clearly has many of the same traits as the other experience games I mentioned, so what does it do differently? Well, it all lies in its player agency. Playing the game all the way through once yourself will more than likely yield a different result than that of anyone else. You'll get a different ending with a different number of failures. There's enough options, each with their own results, that culminate into a different experience for everyone. Just watch any Let's Play and you'll see what I mean. Pretty much every big name Let's Player got a different ending on their playthrough, with different failures along the way. Meanwhile, every Let's Play of Doki Doki Literature Club, Firewatch, and Minecraft Story Mode all end the exact same way, with next to no changes in between besides a different cosmetic or typically some other visual change. To put it simply, Henry Stickmin is an experience game worth playing yourself because your experience is going to change drastically from anyone else, based on the choices you'll make. Now, of course, the game isn't perfect. The options at the start are the most, if not the only influential choices that decide the ending you're destined to get, and the remainder of the game is usually all about finding the right answer in order to progress, though that is alleviated by the jokes that come with each failure. You also don't have much influence over Henry's goals and motives, since as soon as he sees a giant ruby, he goes from government agent to jewel thief without any say on the player's part. You also don't always know how each choice will have Henry behave going forward, which again creates a disconnect between the player's intentions and Henry's. Critically, the game itself is fairly short, so replaying the game and getting multiple, if not every ending, is something that pretty much every Let's Player has done as well, yielding my player agency argument for playing it yourself fairly weak in actuality. However, the game uses a lot of creative methods to provide a fun, hilarious experience that rivals AAA games in the same genre. It may not be worth a $15 purchase to everyone, but to me, it's worth buying for both the experience and for supporting developers who tried, and in many ways succeeded, in providing an experience which achieves player agency and an entertaining time, even despite its limitations. And that is how a stick-figure point-and-click game, both in theory and in practice, achieves something most AAA games fail to do. Okay, so that took a little longer to make than I expected. This video was supposed to be out in like November, but then, things happened. I don't want to ramble too much here. I'll save that for an update video. But my next video will be top 10 games of 2020, and after that it's probably going to be just update videos and long-form documentary-like videos from here on out, just because I think that those are more enjoyable to make. I wanted to make something kind of celebrating Henry Stickmin, and so this is my nerdy contribution to that, so that's out of the way. I technically have 4 long-form documentary-like videos I'm working on as of this moment, so I've kind of been juggling the writing and research of those as of late, but you can at least look forward to them eventually at some point, I promise. But yeah, that's what I've got planned. That's what I've been working on. My dog is barking, and I've accidentally hit the desk a couple of times, so I'm sorry about that. I hope y'all been doing better than me as of late with how things have been. And I'll see you when I eventually upload again. It may be 6 months, but we'll see. So yeah, I'll see you then.